Hey, it's Anne. We're making today's full episode free for everyone. There are no ads, and you'll get the bonus segment, the Ask Anne Anything. If you want to join the ranks of paid subscribers so you always get the full ad-free episode, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. Similar to the newsletter, having paid subscriptions through Substack is how we make this sustainable. All of the money we make is split evenly between me and Melody because she is absolutely an equal creative partner in this whole process. She does so much work. And that's pretty novel. And it's possible because of your subscriptions. So if you want to support that model of production, if you want to make the show sustainable, and if you want to get a screaming deal, if you already have a Culture Study newsletter subscription, just go to culturestudypod.substack.com. And if you, for some reason, can't find the link to get that really great deal, just let me know. I'll send it to you. Okay, on with the show.
And then you said you're going to attack me. So I got over here because I didn't want to give anyone
you
a
have to get to the end of the line.
There was no line.
There is a line.
You were in a circle over here.
Because we already knew our place.
But it doesn't matter.
It does matter.
Can somebody call the police?
Amanda, can you describe what is happening in this video?
Well, outside the doors of a Target that has not yet opened, it's a sunny day. There is a long line stretching out into the parking lot from just outside the doors. And there is a 30-ish-year-old man in a gray quarter zip arguing with a slightly older woman in a black jacket over whether or not he is cutting in line. The line seems to be with the woman. The man does not have a lot of allies in this scenario.
I love, too, they all look like me at the end of a sleepover when I was 18 years old, right? Like, they all, like, literally look like they rolled out of bed and are wrapped in these puffy coats. And you just, at one point, she says, the woman who was at the front of the line, like, we've been here since 3 a.m. Amanda, what are they standing in line for?
There are Stanley cups at stake. And specifically, I think in this video, a collaboration between Stanley and Starbucks that is available only at Starbucks locations within Target stores. And it's a special pink cup.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Amanda Mull. I'm a staff writer at The Atlantic.
So, Stanley Cups, the drinking vessel, not the hockey prize. That's what we're talking about today because of very strong listener demand. And we're also going to talk a lot about just water bottles generally and hydration fetishization. So, Amanda, how would you describe the timeline of water bottle trends?
Water bottle trends go pretty far back. It's interesting because this is a trend cycle that, like, I could sort of see different people sort of like clue into at different moments. Like, it got bigger and bigger and bigger, but like the whole idea of water bottles being trendy goes back to, well, reusable water bottles goes back to the 2000s when Nalgenes first became sort of a thing on college campuses.
I would even date it to 1999, which is when I bought my first Nalgene, but I also lived in the Pacific Northwest, so
yes, early adopter.
Early adopter, and it had the like gray with blue top.
Yes, that's a very classic Nalgene colorway.
Yeah, and then they introduced like fluorescent colors, and that was like, there were 4 of them. You know, like there wasn't like this proliferation.
Right.
Yes, go ahead.
By the time I got to college at the University of Georgia in 2004, in the student bookstore on campus, you could buy a University of Georgia branded Nalgene, and those were very, very popular among incoming freshmen.
Yes, I am sure.
Yes.
And you just like hold it by the top, right? Which is actually very grippable, I will say. And it kind of swings and it's heavy. And the other thing I'll say that maybe people of my micro generation will recognize, and I'm curious to see if you do this too, I still refer to my water bottle oftentimes as a Nalgene. Like I'll say, where's my Nalgene? Like a Kleenex, you know? Like the brand is superimposed.
Yes, it is in some cases like Kleenex or Band-Aid type of thing where especially I think of water bottles that are transparent plastic, that like very hard plastic as Nalgenes. Like I have a Yeti Nalgene, essentially.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah, there's Nalgenes and there's insulated water bottles.
Yeah.
So those I think were like the first like trendy reusable water bottles. But and I wrote about how this has sort of all changed over the years, like way back in 2018, 2019, because at the time like swells were the big thing, which were like this sort of like curvy, like girly, with the screw top lids. Those were huge. And Hydro Flask. I have owned and do own several Hydro Flasks. Those were the big things because they came in like pastel colors. They were very popular among teenagers. And then you get sort of into the Yeti thing as like men are like, well, I'd like a water bottle. And Yeti's like, I'd like to sell you a water bottle. So you get like a bunch of those. And those have like a whole different regional valence than like the early water bottles do, because those are from where I'm from. Those are from the South. So you get like, you know, every water bottle brand has sort of its like cultural valence to it. Like, who is this the water bottle for? And we do this with a lot of consumer goods. But even before all of this started happening in the early 2000s, late 90s, depending on what part of the country you were in, you had this entire run of trendy bottled water. And this is, I think, where the idea of like trendy hydration really started. When you get the Evian, you get then Fiji water, you get this idea that carrying water around is like healthy for you and evidence of like putting value in yourself, and like you're spending money on it, and you understand, you know, which brands are supposed to be the best. So these like labeled water bottles are very, very trendy. They are accessories unto themselves. And then we sort of start to realize that it's not a great idea to use all that plastic. So that's where you get, I think, this transition into using the reusable water bottles, and that sort of induces demand for all of these brands that now make them.
Yeah, so much of what I learned about hydration craze, which is something that I think a lot of people around our age group are like, I only drank water out of drinking fountains. Like, I was like a shriveled shell of dehydration as a child, and now like kids are in maxed hydration all of the time. I learned a lot from the Decoder Ring podcast from Slate. They have a great episode on hydration that I recommend very strongly to anyone, that also interviews a lot of academics on like the history of bottled water consumption and how we came to think of this. But I think this is a good segue for us to actually dig a little bit more into this idea with hydration. So we got so many questions. We received more questions for this episode than any other episode so far. So we are going to get right into it. This first one comes from Katie, and Melody's going to read it.
Were we all in a constant state of dehydration before the water bottle era? Do you think there's some connection between the rise of processed food with excess sodium and the increase in thirst?
Okay, so I want to caveat this first to say that in the past, when I have made comments about the rise of hydration fascination, hydration fetishization, people have been like I had a tweet go viral where people are like, what's wrong with this bitch? Like, does she want us all to like be in pain and have headaches all the time? Like, I wasn't against hydration. I'm not against hydration. I am upset. I'm that person who like when my partner, Charlie, your coworker says, oh, I have a little bit of a headache, or like any ailment, I'm like, oh, have you drunk enough water today? Like, that is always my go-to fix. But at the same time, I think there is a very, very clear shift in how we've thought about the necessity of hydration, or even the word hydration. So what's your thinking on this?
Yeah, I think that sometimes people can misapprehend the urge to like understand how something functions in culture, and how it is function within culture has changed as like criticism of the thing itself. But like drinking water is good. I love drinking water. It's a good idea for everybody to drink water. A lot of people probably don't drink quite enough. The idea that it's good to drink water is like not something I think that like anybody here is critical of in and of itself.
I love it. Yeah. I'm drinking water while we're speaking.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Me too. But like it is very, very interesting the way that like this idea becomes like sort of a marker of wellness overall, in a way that it's almost like axiomatic. This is how we understand what a healthy person is. They drink water, they get enough sleep, they do certain things, they walk 10,000 steps. Like, there are all these sort of like factoids that we invoke, and like if you do all of these things, then you're healthy. And like what does that mean? Is it correct? Like, why did my parents never drink any water as long as I lived in their household? But then suddenly, like, we're all going to die if we don't drink water. Like,
They didn't die. No, I just think about like my granddad, who's, I'm sure, the only water that he drank during the day was either like if he felt an incredible thirst and like chugged a glass of water that he poured at the tap and like drank it at the sink. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Or water that was in gin. Ice cubes that were in his gin and tonic. Like that is how he got his water, and was, smoking several packs of cigarettes a day. I kind of think that the baseline for our grandparents' generation, for many in our grandparents' generation, was just like kind of feeling bad all the time.
Yes, I think this is like a broader topic that I'm sort of obsessed with, because I think that we have a lot of folk beliefs as like a generation, like people who are like, I would say like 40, 45 and under, that like a couple of generations ago, people's health was a lot better because they ate better food. They interacted with like purer things in life. And like when you actually go back and look at the habits of like the greatest generation was like constantly zooted on diet pills. They drank like several times more than the average person does now. They drank coffee all day, and it was shit coffee.
Yes,
and
they were drinking like Folgers.
Yes, it was
and
awful.
Just like ripping on unfiltered cigarettes.
Right, unfiltered cigarettes.
That they started at like age 12. Like my granddad literally started smoking at age 12 and smoked until age 82,
right.
Like
yeah, unfiltered cigarettes, lead in the gasoline, no seatbelts in the cars. Like there was a lot of like fascinating ways to die or become ill that we are pretty shielded from now. And like, which is not to say that like culture is like healthy now, but I do think that this idea that we have changed so much from the worst in our health habits over time, like just really does not stand up to scrutiny.
I'm interested in the ways, and this I think comes from my own context of watching Nalgene's, which I actually really bought to go hiking with. Like we had early Nalgene's, or even something like a Stanley thermos, which the early iterations were, here's a thermos that either you take to work or you take when you're going hunting or fishing, right? Like it had this very specific utility.
Yeah. And often it contained coffee. Like you could use the lid to drink little cups of coffee throughout the day. Like it often was not water at all.
No. And that has then transferred over into a necessity for everyday life. And I think there are some parallels that maybe you can tease out here with like athleisure or ideas about nutrition and hydration and even like fueling that are part and parcel of this like optimization and wellness idea that like even if you're the most rigorous exercise that you do during the day is like walking your dog, that you still need to be hydrated as if you are training for a marathon.
Yeah, I think that something that is interesting over time is what our idea of like an elite lifestyle is. Yes. When most people had to toil outside every day, the way to live like a luxurious, high status life was to be inside and to not have to deal with the outdoors at all. And then you see with, the Industrial Revolution, a lot of work, both physical work and non-physical, moves inside. And then with the technological revolution, it moves even further inside to the internet. So suddenly it's really difficult for a lot of people to get out of their houses, to get as much movement as they should, to spend as much time in nature, in the outdoors, as they might have in previous generations. So that becomes what is sort of aspirational. This concept of being able to go to the gym and being able to spend time sort of fine-tuning your body, to spend time in nature, to spend time at the beach is very, very high status. So with that, you get all of the sort of like physical material trappings of that status. You get athleisure, which, wearing it implies that, maybe you didn't just come from a yoga class or from the gym, but it implies that you're a person who does those things because you have the clothing for
ready.
it. Yeah, you're always ready.
Always ready.
Yeah.
Spontaneous yoga, just right now.
You have all the equipment for it. You're available to go to yoga. You are a person who values these activities and who participates in them. So that is like the way the material goods that are associated with these activities become high status goods, even though they're not quote unquote luxury goods. They're a little bit expensive. Like a Stanley Cup is $45 for the big size, but mostly they are something that signals that you spend time and money and effort on these activities that are considered aspirational and high status. So with that comes the water bottles. And when it's, in a culture where it is considered aspirational and high status to concentrate on your health and to fine tune your body and to treat yourself well, then a water bottle, even if it doesn't directly signal, I'm coming from the gym, it signals that you are somebody who has the time and resources and knowledge. And a lot of this is like knowledge that you're supposed to have and you're supposed to acquire to do the correct things to improve your life as much as like a very rich person could.
Okay, so this next question comes from Alex, and it's about the nature of the discourse.
What is the men's equivalent of the Stanley Cup? Or insert other femme-coded consumer trend here. And why aren't they getting roasted online about it? What can we start roasting the men about?
Okay, so first, we talked a little bit about the Yeti. Do you agree that water bottles more generally are like a femme-coded consumer trend?
I think that they are mostly femme, but I think that has equaled out significantly in the past few years, especially with like the sort of advent of the Yeti branding for drinking vessels. And you see this in other areas of consumer goods as well, where things that were previously intended for women's like physical and appearance upkeep have become more interesting to men. And sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. It just like it's good for men to feel like they have the freedom to, express themselves however they want to and deal with their bodies however they want to. But like, it's probably bad for them to be feeling like even more pressure about that in the way that women do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's one of those shitty things where it's like, we don't want like the equalization to be like men should also feel like the incredibly toxic pressure that women feel to have their body regimented in certain ways. Like that's not equality, right?
Right. Equality of pressure is not equality. Like theoretically, it would be equality of choice and like the ability to self-determine what your body looks like and how you treat it in whatever way you want to.
I think it's so fascinating that water bottle design does feel gender coded to me. Like you were talking earlier about the swell bottles and how like they're curvy and they just feel more feminine. And then I think of like my partner's Yeti that he has, which is giant. It's like 24 ounces. It's man portion of water, or maybe it's 36 ounces. And then the top is like a huge screw top, right? And the mouth is big for like man mouth, right? Like it's just so much bigger.
Yeah.
If I had it, it would be the size of my thigh. Like it's not a desirable water bottle for me. But do you think like that sort of like that's part of how they've marketed to men?
Yeah, I think that like water bottles are sort of a fascinating design challenge as far as like consumer goods go, because like we've had the technology to keep water cold in this kind of vessel for like a really long time. Like the technology itself to like do the practical thing is not new. Stanley has had the patent for like a century. And it works basically the same as it always has. It has not changed a whole lot. And, different companies use like slightly different methods for insulation, but like this is a thing that we can do. These are products we can fabricate. It's not rocket science. It's not something that came up in the past 10 years. So you really get this opportunity. Like once you have a vessel that can hold some amount of water, you can sort of do whatever else to it you want as far as like how you make it look, how sharp or curvy the edges are, what kind of colors it comes in, what kind of metallic finishes you have in the metal parts. Like, do you put a handle on it or do you not? Like this is a big thing about the Stanley for me, and maybe we'll get into this later, but like, I think one of the reasons that the Stanley became so popular with women is that like, 30 to 32 ounce water bottles were already popular among this group. Like, lots of people had the hydro flasks.
Yep.
I knew women who were buying Yetis already when the Stanleys became popular. Like these were out there. There was a lot of brands that made bright colors. So it wasn't just that it was only Stanley that was looking for the feminine audience, but A big problem with like a large capacity water bottle is that women on average have smaller hands. I personally have like tiny baby hands.
I have tiny hands. I have baby hands too. Yeah.
And I know that like I will drink as much water as I have in front of me. So if I have like a drinking glass of water that is easy for me to hold, like it might be 8 hours before I get up and refill it because I'll just the hyper focus and time will pass and who knows what happens in that period. But if I have 40 ounces right there, I'll drink 40 ounces and I will feel better and sleep better. And, I will have plausibly done something better for my health. But like the 30 to 32 ounce water bottles that are just a cylinder, like I have a hard time gripping them when they're full. They're heavy. They're a little bit big around, like, and especially if I'm taking it to the gym or something and I'm sweating and it's a little bit wet and like, it just is really hard to keep a hold on while you're, and then you have to like unscrew it to sip or whatever. Like it is just like a whole thing. And I have tiny baby hands and I never really liked it. The reason I got the Stanley is because it has a handle. Like I saw a lot of people like them. I didn't jump on immediately, but I was like, a lot of people seem to like these. I have not been using my Hydro Flask at home as much as I would like to because it's like, I don't know, it's just annoying to deal with and annoying to grab. The handle is interesting, so like, why don't I try it? And I love it. Like, it's so much easier to grab it, especially with one hand. So I think that was like a design issue that a lot of these companies had that they maybe didn't realize they had because like big water bottles with a handle like did exist, but companies weren't really putting them on bottles of like the 30 to 40 ounce size at the time. And I honestly think that was like the innovation that people were like, oh, this makes so much more sense. You can carry it securely with one hand. You don't have to screw it off to sip. It's got a straw. I think that in sort of the rush to make water bottles that looked good for women, that a lot of companies sort of missed the functional aspects that might be valuable to women in particular, and especially to moms, which is where the Stanleys first took off. And I think that is sort of like a fascinating element of this. And I think it got sort of glossed over in a lot of people trying to explain the trend. I think that is why the Stanley over all of them took off. I think one of them was going to take off and it just happened to be the Stanley because of that.
Yeah, and I think Stanley was also maybe not so precious about, we make water bottles for athletes, right? Like this actually reminds me in some ways about how part of Hoka's success stems from its real willingness to make shoes that are quote unquote athletic shoes that aren't for people who are necessarily running, right?
Right.
Whereas another company, like say Brooks or something, it's like, oh, but we still got to make sure that this is a running shoe. And Hoka's like, nah, we want people to wear these for everything. And the thing about a Stanley Cup, and part of the reason why I don't have one, is it is top heavy. It's not great for putting on like a Peloton thing. It's not great for using necessarily at the gym. Like it doesn't have that utility, which is fine. It has so many other utilities, but you can't pretend that it's necessarily like the best exercise or hiking water bottle.
Right. I would never take my Stanley outside of my house. Well, the one time that I did it, I had to rent a car in my 13 years in New York City. This is the first time I drove a car in the city. I had to rent a car to drive out to the middle of Pennsylvania to do a site visit for a story I wrote about return facilities.
Oh, right.
And so I knew that I was going to have like a 2.5 hour drive each way. And I was like, well, normally I'd have my water bottle with me. So I guess I'm taking my Stanley on the road. But just having it in my hand to like take the train down to the rental car place and pick up the rental car, I felt a little bit silly. You have to like march with it like upright. And it's so big. I was like, I know that this is a little bit silly. This is not normally where I would go with this, but it was in the car great. Like it sat in the cup holder. I know that's something that a lot of people appreciate about it. And I can totally see why that would be, but like you can't take the thing to the gym. Like
or like put it in your backpack, right? Like it doesn't fit.
Right.
In it will
tip over. Yeah, there's definitely like some things that like my Hydro Flasks still do with me. They go to the gym with me. They do a lot of the, like if I went to the beach, I would take my Hydro Flask with me. I was at the beach in January and I did see a couple girls at the beach who had their Stanleys with them. And I was like, God bless, if you brought that on a plane to get here.
and are like exposing it the wide surface area on the top to the sand.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah.
go with God.
Yeah, I brought my Yeti with the screw top for that. The sort of plain plastic one without any insulation. It was like, this is lightweight when there's no water in it. It goes on the plane. It's fine.
So we didn't come up with a masculine coded equivalent, and I think our advice would be like, we don't need to roast men for their consumption habits. Let's just not roast anyone.
What I would say about that, though, is this question confused me because I wasn't exactly sure what she was getting at, is if it's something that like fills this role for men, or if it's just there is a consumption pattern that is equally sort of like inscrutable from the outside that men do. And I think the latter thing, there absolutely are. And there's a zillion of them, like gamer rigs, decorating your like gaming cave,
lining
with
up for beer releases.
Yes. Lining up for Legos. Like the one thing that I got into in my story about this is that Stanley as a consumer phenomenon looks strange when it sort of surfaces to you out of nowhere and you don't have any context on it. But like this phenomenon of people like waiting outside of a store for a new release or whatever is happening constantly. You're just not in the parking lot at 9 in the morning when people are being let in to get their, limited edition sets of whatever. Like this is really, really common and not gendered at all. Yeah. Shoes, sneakers have been huge about this for years.
Yep.
The ones that are specifically male coded, I think, are sneakers, Legos, anything to do with gaming. I think men definitely get roasted for certain types of consumption habits that they have. And for this consumption pattern of behavior, you might not be in the communities that are roasting them, I think, because like a lot of who I saw roasting Stanley Cup owners were other women. It was not just purely men doing this. I think men roast other men for this kind of stuff a lot. I think that because women make up an outsized portion of the consumer market, and there's there's historical reasons for that. I think that often our consumer habits are surfaced a little bit more easily to the culture at large. But I would say that this sort of behavior replicates itself in all kinds of cohorts of humans, no matter gender.
And I'd also say part of the reason that we roast people for it, there's like two twin forces happening. There's this understanding that like it's a hysteria, right? Like that there's a feminizing that happens. So like when men are competing for these objects, it is in a behavior style that we associate with women and with like irrational behavior. And then also there's like a very muted but very present capitalist critique that's like, how can you be this excited about buying something? And I don't think it's necessarily like an actual, like, don't buy anything. Like, it's not like a Marxist critique. It's more like, how can you believe that someone is this excited about buying an object?
Right.
And I think both of those understandings are pretty misplaced.
I think that they are too. And especially this idea that people find it sort of inexplicable to be excited about buying an object. I think that people do a lot of internal justification that their fixations are somehow like objectively superior to the fixations that they don't understand. You can see this conversation sort of play out in like little interpersonal interactions on the internet about the Stanley Cups all over the place, where the Stanley Cup will come around and somebody will, or it'll come up on a subreddit for people who collect something else.
Yes.
And
yes.
Yeah. And somebody will be like, how could you like spend all this time on a water bottle? And someone will reply to them and go, you're on an internet message board about stuffed animals, right? you know that this is like, and they'll respond again and go, but this is like objectively that, and they're really well made, and they're, and we all have these sort of justifications for why the things we're obsessed with are more rational and more justifiable than the things other people are obsessed with. And maybe they are to us, maybe they fit like some practical or emotional need for us that a water bottle wouldn't. But this is like one of the most replicable modern human behaviors I have ever come across. Like everybody is like this about something, even if you don't believe you are.
Yeah. So I just wrote about dahlias, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that's going on in the dahlia world right now, what's called the Dahlia Wars, and there's all of this competition for unicorns. And the way that I finished the piece was asking people, how is this behavior replicated in your niche expertise or hobby? And people all over, they're like, this is how this happens in Civil War memorabilia collection. Like, this is how this happens in knitting all over the place. And I think that, like, if we can extend that understanding to also include something like this, which is really ultimately about collecting. And this is a great segue to our next question, which is about sustainability. We got a ton of questions about sustainability, and this question from Melanie summed it up best.
At what point is the market for stainless steel tumblers and other reusable vessels oversaturated? I think it already is. Is this bad for the environment? Where do obsolete bottles and tumblers go to die?
Right. I feel like you're the best person to answer this question, even though it's a really hard one, because I've loved your reporting on like what happens to returns and like the stuff that like we like to not think about when it comes to consumer behavior. So what do you think here?
I think the market is oversaturated. Like, I think that we are already past capacity for how many of these that like humanity could actually like need. When it becomes bad for the environment is sort of difficult to pinpoint, like, because there is all this sort of like very difficult, very opaque math that goes into calculating like the environmental impact of like a particular product. And it is usually sort of incomplete. And it makes things just really like hard to compare to each other. Also, I would say that like most people are not collecting these.
Yeah.
As with anything on the internet, what you see and what becomes ridiculous enough to like cross your awareness is probably an extreme of the entire set of behavior that goes along with a particular object or a particular fandom or whatever. So you get people acting a little strange in the Target parking lot or rushing in to buy things. And it's funny because most of the videos that I saw of people rushing in to buy the things were actually pretty orderly. I've worked at big box stores in the past and like, I don't know, I've seen worse fights than that. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Over like a sale, like a markdown on sheets, right?
Yeah. Like people were rushing and it was very quick and like a little bit chaotic. But like in most of those, like nobody got hurt. Like nobody, you know, nobody fell over, nobody tripped, nobody pushed anybody else. It's in the grand scheme of retail behavior, this was like sort of tame, I thought, mostly from the videos that I saw and from like the shit I've seen myself. So most people don't collect. Like collecting is in anything is like a very small percentage of the buying behavior that you're going to see in a market. But you do end up sort of accumulating these over time. And a lot of times you're going to end up accumulating them because
you went to a wedding and someone gave you one. You went to a conference and usually the ones that they give you are like pretty low quality. So they're really on your like JV shelf and they just hang out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you sort of like accumulate them over time because they are an easy like piece of swag to give out. They are an easy gift from like the family member you don't really know.
Yeah.
But everybody knows they're like expensive enough to be like useful, and expensive enough that like somebody, spent $40 on you or whatever. So they feel like a really good gifting slot. I remember talking to the head of Swell back when I wrote that article in 2018 or 2019 at first. And she said that there was like this very replicable behavior that they saw on ordering on their website, that they would have customers that would order one and maybe like come back and order another one. And then they might not see them again, but then it was holidays and they'd come back and they'd order 5 because they were going to give them to their friends or their like female family members or something. So because they were like a really, like they're a good ROI gift.
Yeah.
Like nobody's going to be upset that they got like a nice water bottle.
Totally.
They're very safe. So I think that like for most people, the accumulation that you end up with is this sort of like ambient accumulation because they are marketed as gifts, because they are so frequently given away as like event swag or whatever. And that is like, I think probably where more of your environmental waste comes from people sort of like distributing these, like they distribute tote bags.
Yep.
And like that behavior happens at scale because it happens like because you order like several thousand of them to give out or several hundred, depending on the size of your event. Whereas somebody who's just like ordered 4 of them because they had a couple in a different sizes and then there was like a color that they really liked that came out and they're like, damn, they got me again. Like an individual doing that, I think is probably still toward like one of the extremes of consumption, of personal consumption for these. And even then, like, it's not going to be as harmful as like this happening at scale because a Fortune 500 company decided to give one of these to every single one of their employees for the holidays or whatever.
Yeah.
Like,
I think I would, like, if I was criticizing this, first of all, I think water bottles are actually a really great way to deter people from drinking bottled water and celebrate the fact that we have good drinking water in the vast majority of places in this country. And we should celebrate that municipal infrastructure whenever possible. But then I think that, like, if you're going to critique or if you're going to try to, like, advocate for systemic change, it should be at the corporate level, right? It's like, don't give this a swag. This is not the utility that you think. Like, this is actually where the waste comes. Because if someone donates, I don't know, a water bottle that, like, is for, like, Edward Jones and Co., like, someone is not likely to thrift that or secondhand it. You know what I mean? Like, there are other types of water bottles that people do want to reuse, but that's not necessarily the one.
Yeah. And I think that, like, that is like a great place to start, and like stop giving out this stuff that nobody wants just because it has a logo on it and because you feel like it's good, like employee relations or whatever. Like, stop, don't do it. Do something else. Buy them lunch. Like,
I don't need. Do you know how many pairs of BuzzFeed like socks I still have? Like, I don't need that.
Yeah, but I think that the idea that these are good for the environment and buying one is like good for the environment is something that these brands use to sell more of these than like people really need. So like, I think what the questioner is bringing up is like a valid thing, but I would say I would be sort of slow to generalize collectors as like the main consumers of these. And also like you have to sort of look at like the holistic market and like where they come from in all kinds of different ways.
Okay, so our last question is a twofer, and this is one that we got a ton about, and that's about kids and water bottles. So we're going to play two questions back to back and then answer them together. First up is Nora.
I'm a former teacher, nanny, babysitter. I currently am a pediatric social worker. And my question is, when the fuck did kids get so obsessed with carrying water bottles? Like, am I just blocking out my own water bottle habits from when I was a kid? Why does every child always have a water bottle and is so obsessed with hydration?
And then here's Caitlin.
Can you explain how water bottle mania extends to kids and two specific things? One, class signaling at an early age, and two, wellness surveillance in terms of monitoring how much water kids are drinking. I see this in my daughter's cohort, and I wonder, why are we like this as caregivers?
There's so much going on here, and I feel like we can maybe just start with our joint acknowledgement that, like, yeah, we did not have water bottles when we were kids. Like, this was not a thing.
Well, I was thinking about this because I have a very vivid memory of my fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Posey, who told us if we brought in water bottles, we could not leave them on our desk overnight and use them again the next day because they would be dirty. They would grow bacteria. So, which suggests to me that this is a thing that we were doing in the fourth grade. And I was in the fourth grade in like 95.
And that lines up a little bit more too with the with water craze, right? With the beginning of the bottled water craze. I will also say that you were in the South and it was hotter there.
Yes, it is very hot in the South. I think what it was related to though is that it was like by that point in school, it was already considered sort of like high status to be an athlete. Like if you played club soccer or if you swam on your neighborhood swim team or something like that, that was already very high status. And we all brought water bottles to soccer practice. I played soccer when I was a kid.
What kind of water bottle?
It was like a big insulated igloo bottle. Like it was red because go dogs.
Yeah.
And like the thing flipped up at the top. Yeah. And so I had one of those, and I think that like what happened, because like status signaling among kids is interesting to me because I remember it so clearly, like what we did as kids. And I think because I have always been interested in like clothing and interested in like in trends and stuff. And I think that some people remember it less well because they don't have this like weird fixation on it that I've always had.
Same. Yeah, no, I have similar memory.
Yeah.
Yes, go ahead.
So I remember like people would bring in like their like soccer practice water bottles and want to use them in class because it was another thing that like, you know, like athleisure all these years later that marked them as like high status because you played a club sport, you played soccer, you played tennis, whatever.
Yeah.
And
it's like a Letterman's jacket, but for like smaller kids.
Right, exactly. exactly. And then I remember at the same time, it was very cool to have Umbro soccer shorts and wear those in class. And like the other brands wouldn't do. You had to wear the Umbros. Like if you had the other brands, well, like why didn't you have the Umbros? Like you clearly acknowledge that they're cool. You're trying to rip them off. So like, where are they? Wouldn't your mom take you to the mall? Like
the hold that Umbros had on 90s kids is just incredible. I mean, at least they were comfortable. That's what I think back on.
Yeah, and like there was the trendy perfumes. You had to have a Calvin Klein perfume.
CK1.
Like, yeah, I was a CK obsession girly. I've always liked the sort of more amber scents. And to this day, that persists.
I want the gender neutral scent. Actually, it was just the only scent that they had at the Bon Marché, now Macy's. Anyway.
Yeah. So like we were, when we were kids, we did all of this status signaling, like whether we like totally understood that's what we were doing or not. Like things being cool among kids is something that so far predates Stanley's and so far predates this set of kids. And like we got it in more like gate-kept ways because it was mostly like teen magazines and like what was on Nickelodeon and what was on like the TV that we could watch. So kids I think are definitely getting it like a ton more now via TikTok because it's like via Instagram, whatever, because there is so much more media scaled for them than there was for us. But I think that like kids have been status conscious and brand conscious for a really, really long time. Like they sort of couldn't not be because we all stew in like a pot of marketing from the time that we're old enough to understand. And kids pick up a lot when they're little. So I think that it didn't surprise me at all to hear that Stanleys were cool among kids because we would have done it when we were kids too.
Absolutely. I also have a tactile memory of what the drinking fountain felt like. Right, in elementary school. And I think we made just a lot more use of the drinking fountain generally. When I was a camp counselor, so this is early 2000s, the way that we would keep kids hydrated, because most of them did not have water bottles, was you would pour water into the cups when they came in for a meal. And they couldn't have their it was like fruit punch, right? So just like sugar, they couldn't have their sugar water until they drank the water that was in the cup. So maybe they got 3 cups of water a day. But I do think that like part of this also, this idea of like parenting means your kid always having their water bottle with them. Some of it is COVID related, right? Because like you weren't allowed to use drinking fountains for a period of time. And like just this idea of like you shouldn't share a drinking fountain. Like maybe that's unsanitary in all these different ways. Or
I think there are also fewer drinking fountains now.
Yes, there are. New York still has pretty great drinking fountains. Although some people I know were like, I would never use a drinking fountain, and it's fine. I use ones in New York all the time.
It'll make
I'm
you
not
strong.
Putting my mouth on it. I'm not making out with the drinking fountain. It's just the water. But I think it also has to do with this kind of like individual responsibility parenting fetishization, right? Like that everything, like to be a good parent, you need to be mindful of all things for your individual kid at all times.
Yeah, and the kids need to be equipped. Constantly and for everything. And the kids need, the push to surveil kids now seems sort of omnipresent, and to ensure that they're, just like the rest of us are, that they're maximizing their health, that they're doing all the things that are right for their bodies, that they're not doing anything that's bad for their bodies, that they're paying attention to their health, and that you're paying attention to their health. And like health is like a status marker. In the United States, it is something that's mediated by income to a great extent. So it makes a sort of like awful bit of sense that like your child's health would also be a status marker for parents and like a badge of like a good or bad parent, even though there's like only so much that a parent can even do to determine if their kid is going to be healthy or not. Like there's just a lot that's like not up to anybody's individual control. But like in the United States, we believe that everything is up to your individual control. And like, why aren't you doing better?
Right. And it's this fantasy of control, too, that like if your kid always has a water bottle, then they, by extension, they will always be hydrated. And the idea that like somehow you can control and know how much your kid is drinking at school, right? And know how much they're eating. Whereas I think the previous understanding was very much like school is kind of a black box. Like the kid goes into the elementary school classroom and then, I don't know, maybe they ate lunch, maybe they didn't, right? Like I always ate hot lunch, which meant that my mom had no idea what I was eating. She just knew on Thursdays I got chocolate milk. It was the best day of the week. But now there's this idea that somehow all of these activities are knowable. I can understand why that feels like quote unquote good parenting, and I can also see how incredibly fatiguing it must be.
Right.
All right, we're going to move on to the Ask Ken Anything part of the show. Usually this is only for paid subscribers, but every now and then we like to let the rest of you peek behind the curtain and see what you're missing out on. If you like what you hear, head over to culturestudypod.substack.com to become a paid subscriber. You can catch up on all of the AAA segments you've missed, which run the gamut from which plants should I put in my office to how do I get my friends to stop inviting themselves over. Today, Amanda and I are answering 2 questions, one practical and one philosophical. So this first practical question comes from Christine.
How do you keep the trendy water bottles clean? I became obsessed with my Owala water bottle, but then it developed some black mold on the lid, despite me cleaning it. And I even bought the brush, and I have tried the brush, and I've tried the little brush inside the big brush, but my Owala is still sadly dirty.
All right. So before we started recording, we were all sharing with Melody how disgusting our water bottles can get. Like I was saying that, like, oh, when it tastes like algae, you know that it's time to make some changes in your life. I recently bought some of these tablets online that are specifically marketed to clean your water bottle. They essentially function like denture cleaners. And I know this because I used to use denture cleaners to clean my retainers. And there's like some sort of oxidation process that happens, and it mostly works. I would say it did not work as well as I was hoping, but it mostly works. And the other thing, I mean, like this is the hard thing too. They say don't put them through the dishwasher because it makes them less effective and like less able to clean. So what's your advice here?
I think another reason, and like, you know, I said this earlier, but I think that some of the sort of like physical design choices that they made with the Stanley are like things that really sort of made it latch on in a way that others didn't. But like a nice part about the Stanley is you can just take off the top and put your entire like forearm in there. Like the top is wide. And you
can use a normal scrub brush to get in there.
Or I just take my normal sponge like I'm cleaning any other cup. It's just like, it's better. It's easier. Like the wide top really just does let you put your hand in there. All the other ones are just a huge pain to clean, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. And that oftentimes, I think the reason people buy a new water bottle is that they've reached the point of no return with their existing water
it's like,
bottle.
I've had this one for 2 years. I have not maintained it very well. It's time to start again. Maybe this time will be different.
Okay, our last question goes back to this thing with kids and water bottles and what it means for parenting. Leah submitted this question, and Melody's going to read it.
There's an expectation in modern American parenting that your kid has a water bottle with them at all times. This is, of course, a new expectation that did not exist when I was young. Did I ever drink water as a kid? Doubtful. I suspect that this thing where kids are never more than 3 feet from their water bottle is more about the increasing burden of performing good parenting than it is about the actual well-being of the kids involved. I have a 7-year-old kid who loses things, gloves, socks, stuff that's supposed to be brought home from school, you name it. And this includes water bottles, which are expensive. So a year or so ago, after spending probably hundreds of dollars on lost water bottles, I decided to opt out of the water bottle game. He no longer totes a water bottle to school or friends' houses or the playground. He is largely left to fend for himself out there in the world when it comes to hydration. Summer camp is the exception, we're not monsters. So my question is, am I allowed to feel smug for opting out of yet another unnecessary parenting expectation? Or is this new water bottle mandate actually a good one and I'm depriving my kid of his essential bodily needs?
Okay, so my take here is that any place where your kid is, whether it's school, after school program, soccer, there should be apparatuses there in case a kid doesn't have their water bottle. So like they're not going to let they can't just rely on personal responsibility here because there's always going to be a kid who forgets it. So there's always going to be a water supply. So I think it's okay. What's your take here, Amanda?
I think it's basically fine. I'd send the kid to soccer with a water bottle, just because you know that you're going to be getting a lot of exercise there, and it would be safe to have one. Plus, that's like one place, so you go there, you come back. Hopefully, you don't lose it. I never lost mine when I was a kid, and I lose stuff. I'm not like the most organized person alive, but like I think it's like basically fine. I mean, like you said, everywhere that the kid goes is going to have a water fountain or going to have like a supply of water. Like, I think that I wouldn't necessarily say to feel smug about it, because like, I think there is like, you're not in competition with the people who feel like they have to do this. Like they are beset by the same set of
run your own race.
Yeah.
Run your own race.
Yeah. They are beset by the same, set of expectations that you're trying to resist. They just haven't gotten there yet. So yeah, I think it's like basically fine. Unless the school, like I know some schools have these sort of like draconian rules now about bathroom availability and water availability. So like if you're, it's situational, but if like your kid's school is like normal, is not some sort of like torture system, then you're probably fine. Like I went through life without carrying a water bottle anywhere but soccer practice when I was a kid. And I am a healthy and hydrated adult now. So you're probably fine.
Yeah. It's one of those things where philosophically, I think that unless we use stuff, that stuff goes away oftentimes, right? So like, I kind of like always use a drinking fountain whenever I'm in a public space, because I'm like, look at me using the drinking fountain, because I want drinking fountains to be there for everyone, right? Like I think that is a public good.
I think it's good to put pressure on schools to ensure that they provide water for kids, that they have like many ample sources of hydration for children during the day.
Yeah. And I think like if we need to teach kids, I'm sure there were implicit and explicit lessons about how to not put your entire mouth on a drinking fountain when I was a kid, right? Like how to be a good drinking fountain user so that they don't become germ machines in some capacity. But I think that that's one of those things that like, it's an equity issue also. Like you want to be able to have something available so that if a kid doesn't have a water bottle for whatever reason, that there's water available to them. Yeah. So that's my philosophical thinking. But again, it's not, let everyone run their own race when it comes to parents.
Yeah. Like if your kid is happy not carrying a water bottle around and you're happy not having to make sure that they carry a water bottle around, then I think that you've already solved that problem for y'all. All
right. Amanda, thank you so much for coming on to talk about hydration, water bottles, Stanley, all of the affiliated things. Will you tell us what kind of Stanley that you have?
Thank you so much for having me again. My Stanley is a 40-ounce quencher. It is apparently what was a seasonal color. So it is like a very bright, like cobalt blue, but it's got like speckles of lavender and mint green paint on it that are like very, very tiny, and they're a little bit textured. Like when you touch them, like it doesn't look rough. It's very shiny, but like, you do get a little nice, a little nice feeling.
I will say that the flecks are also a little bit of a throwback to like, and the pebble feel is also like an original Stanley to kind of, it looks like it's not from the 2000s.
Yeah. It's a fun thing. It was just like the coolest one that like Dick's Sporting Goods had when I like bit the bullet and ordered one.
Amazing. Mine is a hot pink, tall, like the tall, skinny hydro flask.
Nice.
It's filthy. It might be time for a new one. Maybe. I mean, I'm trying. Like I bought those tablets, but we'll see what happens. Yeah. All right. Thank you so much. If people want to find more from you on the internet, where can they find you?
I am at Amanda Mull on Twitter. I am amandamull.bluesky.social or however those work. I don't 100% know, but I am on there. I do post somewhat frequently. I just love to post. That is one of my fatal flaws, honestly. And I am a staff writer at The Atlantic, and that's where all my writing goes.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, like a 3-parter on romance novels. It's going to be all about like the business and with authors. It's going to be amazing, even if you don't think that you're interested in romance novels. And we're also talking about online shopping and reviews and like all the weirdness with buying things online and what's going on with Instagram. And we're going to talk about why we get so mad at celebrities. All of these are going to be great. You don't want to miss them. But if you want to suggest a future topic or ask a question about the culture that surrounds you and like what's going on with it, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, check the show notes for a link to our Google form or type in tinyurl.com/culturestudypod. The full version of today's episode is free for everyone. So if you like what you heard and you want to support the show, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's $5 a month or $50 a year, and paid subscribers to the Culture Study newsletter get a deal on it. So go find that link if you haven't already. And if you subscribe, you get ad-free episodes, the exclusive Ask Ann Anything segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. And the knowledge that you've made this show sustainable. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you so much. Don't forget to head to culturestudypod.substack.com to take full advantage of all of your perks, including weekly discussion threads for each episode and your priority Google form. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod.